Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, Unleashing Growth Potential for Defense Contractors. In today's episode, we continue down the road of understanding CMMC, its regulations, and controls. Up next is IA.L2-3.5.1. Identify system users, processes acting on behalf of users, and devices. We'll break down what this control means, why it matters, and how it impacts your organization's cybersecurity posture. We'll also provide practical insights and strategies for achieving compliance and securing your systems effectively. So, whether you're a defense contractor aiming to win more contracts or simply someone interested in bolstering your cybersecurity knowledge, you're in the right place. Are you ready to rumble? We're joined once again today by Mike Frieder, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
In that intro, I felt a little bit goofy, but we're gonna roll with it.
You know what?
So
I say, let's roll, man. There's no point, hey, look, you can have a nice, smoothly edited podcast, but that's not what the people want. The people love when we have bloopers and screw ups and you know what, when we keep it real. And I'd love to tell you that we have a million hours a week to really polish this thing off. But you know what? We're just so busy helping defense contractors stay compliant and get compliant that you know what? Hey, blubber it all. Who cares? At the end of the day, as long as we deliver some value in these podcasts, who cares? Roll with
that's
it.
right. That's right. So, Mike, this week we start yet another Control Family 5, which focuses on identification and authentication. To start off, we're talking about the importance of identifying system users, processes acting on behalf of users, and devices. So, to jump right into it, why is this a control important?
Well, Roman, this control is a very interesting control. If you ask me, it's a little bit of an overlapping control. I think a lot of this is addressed in Control Family 1 with access control, but now we have this Control Family 3.5, which is identification and authentication. And the goal is to, one, really drill down into what needs to be identified in order to track down issues. And then the second thing is to really drill down into how authentication happens. And that's what the Control Family 5 controls are all about. So in the case of 3.5.1, identify system users, processes acting on behalf of users, and devices. What this is all about is knowing that you have an active inventory should the worst happen. That if you get wiped out from ransomware, or let's say you have a rogue device or a rogue user, a rogue service, that you can identify that quickly and easily, whether it's in posthumous after an attack, or whether it's um, the need for auditing to know what has access to CUI. All those things are very important, and so that's what this control really and truly is all about. It's all about proving that you know who has access to CUI, and that's what this control is. So in that vein, I think it's a fairly simple control, but yet maybe one of the most important controls, because if you don't know what should be and is authorized to access your system, who does?
Absolutely. So, you know, uh, simply, what are the key assessment points that an assessor would be looking for on this control?
Yeah, great question, Roman. So there's three assessment points on this one. The first assessment point is determine if system users are identified. Now, we know that there are some key phrases throughout the system security plan. One of them is determine, right? A lot of times when we see determine, that means go look in the system, prove it to us. Another one is define. Define means you better have a written policy and evidence around it that's on paper. So in this one, first assessment point, determine if system users are identified. They're going to want to see how are they identified, and typically that's going to be in a user access system. Probably the most common one is going to be that system users are identified via, Active Directory or Entra ID. It's an easy place to go and look for it. Another place you can go look for it, though, is, on the devices front, you could go and look and say that the devices are identified within Intune. And, Intune is a device management platform. We're huge fans of Intune. We love the combination of Intune and conditional access for getting people compliant and making sure that, non-enrolled devices don't have access to CUI. So that's a pretty big deal. So with all that in mind, basically we're at a point where we say, okay, so how are we going to determine it? Well, we're going to look in our systems. We're going to look to see access lists. Maybe you have, let's say you're an external service provider and you have a remote desktop support tool. They're going to want to see what users have access to that remote support tool, and that's what they're looking for on that. The second assessment point, determine if processes acting on behalf of users are identified. Processes acting on behalf of users are identified. I think there's two places you can identify them. One, probably the better place is going to be in your SIEM solution, because obviously if a process is running, you want it logged and you want it to be identified what user it's running under. And then, of course, the second place is going to be, again, following with most traditional networks, which is I think the majority of our clients have Windows networks. You'll be looking in the Entra ID and Active Directory again, but this time for service accounts to determine what those processes are running under and the user account that those are running under. So that's going to be a service account. Again, really bringing sort of a little bit of remnants of 3.1.1, the very first control into 3.5.1. A very similar request of what they're trying to identify here. So I do think that's kind of interesting. Next is determine if devices accessing the system are identified. So again, we've got to identify these devices. They've got to be identified somewhere. The most common places I would suggest are probably Active Directory or Entra ID. You can identify devices there, or Intune. That's really our favorite, right? So using the Intune device inventory is a great solution to allowing the organization to determine if devices accessing the system are identified. Obviously, if there's a conditional access rule in place that says you can't access the system unless you're identified as being enrolled in Intune and compliant, boy, you know what? You're nailing that control. You're really nailing it. Other places where devices can be identified, obviously the log files, which means the SIEM solution comes into play there. And of course, you can even really go so far, a little extreme, but you can even go with IP address and MAC address and things like that, which are all identifiers. So yeah, lots of places you can identify the devices, but for sure they need to be devices that you've approved to be in the system. Otherwise, whoop, heap big trouble.
Speaking of heap big trouble, what are the potential difficulties of enacting this one in an organization?
Yeah, you know what? No difficulties at all. I mean, I have to kind of joke around a little bit because this is normally controls, you're going to have some friction, right? Maybe it's a cultural shift like adopting multi-factor authentication, or maybe it's a cost issue like paying for a SIEM solution in the first place. You know what? This control, you're not going to kid you, Roman. This one's smooth sailing. I think the majority of defense contractors are just going to naturally meet this by the way their system operates. No real big changes necessary. I don't get to say that very often with NIST SP 800-171. Look, if you're running a typical Active Directory network, you got it nailed. Here's who I do think will have some challenges with this: the micro-sized and small defense contractor. Some of those folks are so small, they might only have one or two or three computers, maybe five, and they have no server and they have no domain set up, and they're just pure work group, and like they're just a bunch of standalone computers. In that case, there's no Active Directory, Entra ID, et cetera, to really go to. And so you actually can do this manually on paper by defining via written policy what machines can hold CUI. It's really tedious to do that, right? Everybody gets a new machine. Somebody's got to break out the policy and update it. So I think from that perspective, it's a little tougher for the smaller companies, but I gotta tell you, Roman, what we do with the smaller companies, and certainly what we encourage, we take those smaller companies and we put them into Azure Government. We'll give them an Office 365 GCC High account, and we'll spin them an Entra ID instance, and they can actually join the computer to Intune conditional access, an Entra ID, and still meet these controls, even if they're just one person. Now, I know what the audience may be thinking. They're thinking, man, Mike, that's an expensive way to go if you're a single person. And I'm not sure that I really disagree with you, to be honest. But then again, if you're a small one-man show and you want to play in the defense game, you've got to follow the rules. There's just no other option, right? You're literally putting your name on the line. You're attesting to being compliant with this stuff. And frankly, the good news is that you need to find a way to, you need to find a way to pay for it. And how are you going to do that? Well, you're going to go to your contracting officer You're gonna say, hey, contracting officer, I got this requirement. This is how much it costs me. I have to get this expense reimbursed. I have to go up on my price this amount because you're requiring me to be compliant. Compliance costs money. And then if I'm a smart contractor, I'm going to apply my typical profit overhead to that amount of money because it takes time and effort away from my business to do this compliance stuff that's required by law. And you know, you got to pay for that time somehow, right? So many smaller defense contractors that we work with just take this one on the chin when they really can't afford to, right? These are not big, huge companies that can afford to just blow out tons and tons of money on compliance. This is not a normal thing for them in day-to-day operations until now. Look, you got to find a way to not just take this one on the chin. You know, you need to find a way to go up on your price to get reimbursed, which means you got to grow up and be a big boy now, right? Like that's part of what we love helping our clients do. We love helping them mature processes. It's fun. It almost always leads to increases in revenue and sales and profit. And it's something that, again, I don't ever advocate gouging the government. That can get you in trouble too. But certainly, if you can justify the expense by having the DoD or a prime as the only person who is requiring you, you know, to meet these compliance standards, you got to pay for it somehow. Business is business. You go out of business, in fact, if you don't raise your prices or get this covered. So these are very, very important elements that I think a defense contractor who is small and couldn't easily meet this already, they need to realize that. So, you know, my perspective is simple. I watch out for those little guys. I was one of those little guys. You know, we got a little bit of size to us now, but I spent so many years as a really, really small business, you know, struggling with situations like this that as we got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and, you know, we're still growing. Last year, I think we grew by 40% gross. You know, we find ourselves better able to answer those questions and understand how to navigate you know, the rough seas of business ownership. And, you know, certainly being in the defense industry, they're not making it any easier. So that's, you know, hopefully that's some advice that some of my smaller company folks out there will take to heart. And, you know, if you're struggling to figure that kind of stuff out, and you're beating your head against the wall and you're like, oh my God, Mike, like there's so much to this and I don't know how we're going to do this and yeah, it's so expensive and look, give us a call, all right? It doesn't ever cost anything to find out how we can help. And I'll tell you that, you know, there are cost-effective ways to get compliant. You know, I don't know of a free way, but I know of one that I would tell you is quite cost-effective and something that I think that, well, it's proven that one person businesses can afford it because we have a slew of them that we take care of every year. So yeah, that's again that I would say that's the biggest difficulty for larger companies or any company with like a real network and a server and you know or domain, no problem. They're gonna sail through this thing, no problem.
You know, we're 40 something controls into this, and I think that's the first time I've heard you say no difficulties.
I think it is. I mean, I think you know, and then again, I guess I got to take that back for you know maybe a fourth or a third of our audience. Uh, but you know, I think that generally speaking, this is one of those controls where the reality for most people, this is in fact pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Well, if you've been with us for 92 episodes now, you know how this works. We ask our questions, and then we have a silly question at the end, and I must say, I think this one's pretty good. So we're talking about identifying system users and their processes and their devices so that there's no surprises. So the question here is, which is harder, identifying rogue devices on the network or figuring out who ate your lunch in the office refrigerator?
Oh man. You know, I have a story. My wife used to make these really amazing jarred salads. And you know, we're macro counters if you're into working out, you know what that is. We're macro counters and you know, we're pretty serious about our fitness in the family. We don't really drink. But we're pretty athletically serious and we're pretty nutrition serious. And my wife had someone, it is still to this day a mystery, She's a college professor, and she had someone take her jarred salad, eat it, and put the jar back in the faculty refrigerator. And she came home, and I thought her head would explode. I actually thought that there was a really good chance. There's a really good chance that her head would explode. I don't know what better way to put it than that. And I will share with you that we never did find out who that person was, but there were some nasty notes that were left in the faculty refrigerator after that fact, and I still laugh about that
You
today.
know, I have a very similar story that I'll share. Uh, a previous job that I worked, my sister's mother-in-law is very proper, like New York Italian. The family's very proper New York Italian, and she had made some ziti that my sister had brought home to me after going over there for dinner one time, and I was really excited to take it for lunch. And I had some for dinner the night before, and it was really good. And I made sure to leave myself enough for a full meal the next day at work. So I get in at work and I put it in the office fridge, something I hardly ever did because I usually had a sandwich, so I usually kept that at my desk with me. So I put it in the fridge. I go to get it, and very similar to your wife, not it was there, but very clearly less of it. So somehow worse than eating the whole thing, somebody clearly took like two or three bites and put it back because I had measured. I was like, this is what's going to be enough for me for a whole meal for lunch, and I took it out and I'm like, it's there, it's missing. It was very clear. Never figured it out. It was always something that I had assumed just happened in TV for comedic purposes. I was like, nobody who actually takes somebody's lunch.
Yeah,
And that
apparently there are those people in the world.
that day I found out, but I will obviously be mad, but I understand somebody doing to your wife what they did more than what happened to me. I was like, who just takes like a bite and puts it back? Like who like it doesn't make sense to me, but it's that happened to me too. And so I definitely think it's harder to find out who did that because nobody comes to you and be like, "Hey, can I have a bite? Hey, can I have your jarred salad?" Like nobody comes to you and is like, "Hey," but there are ways to figure out where the rogue device is coming from, who's operating it, that kind of thing. So I definitely think, in my opinion, the more difficult is to figure out who ate your lunch because you and I both have stories of that happening and we don't know who did it.
Exactly. But I will tell you that I've been on multiple client consultations and just, doing my normal inspecting, kind of thing. That's what we do. We're information system auditors here. And, I whip out the iPhone and, start looking for wireless networks. And, sometimes we use some scanning software to scan for hidden SSIDs. And I'll tell you what, it is not uncommon for us to find some very interesting networks in there. We go asking for it, and usually we can find the source. So I think that I think that there is a definite answer to your question, and I think that definite answer is easier to find out where the rogue networks are. And man, if somebody takes your lunch, good luck. And for those people out there, if you're one of our audience members and you're yanking somebody's lunch out the fridge, shame on you.
I can't believe people actually do that. That's another perk of working from home. Nobody's taking my lunch.
That's right. That's right.
Um, and that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to thank Mike for joining us and talking about the ever important topic of identifying users and also identifying lunch thieves, whether you can or not. Thanks, Mike.
Always a pleasure, Roman.
But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us via our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
Well, they should like, subscribe, and they should definitely tell a friend in the defense industry because you know what? These podcasts, they just keep getting better. And for that matter, more entertaining every time. And you know what? We're always delivering a whole lot of value too.
And we really appreciate it also if you could rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you thought provoking episodes and high quality content. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.